Arnold laughed. The crowd laughed. But then, her quiet husband stepped forward. And in just 20 seconds, the room went completely silent. You won't believe what happened next. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. It was a bright, buzzing afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind of day that made the city feel alive. Inside the convention center, the energy was electric. Music pulsed through the speakers, protein shake booths handed out samples, cameras flashed non-stop, and social media influencers swarmed the venue with ring lights and gym gear. The occasion? One of the biggest fitness expos in the country. And headlining the event was none other than Arnold Schwarzenegger, the legend, the 7-time Mr. Olympia, the movie star, the governor, the inspiration to generations. Arnold was in his element. Signing autographs, posing for photos, cracking jokes with fans, and sharing motivational lines like only he could. His presence alone turned the room into a celebration of strength, charisma, and that larger-than-life spirit. People adored him. But then, something happened. Among the sea of muscular physiques, gym tanks, and spray tans, a couple entered the scene. And they looked a little different. Karoline was radiant with excitement. Her eyes sparkled like someone meeting their childhood hero. Dressed simply but stylishly, she beamed with admiration as she clutched her VIP ticket. She had been a fan of Arnold for over a decade. His movies, his quotes, his story, it all meant something to her. Walking beside her was her husband, Daniel. Now, Daniel didn't exactly blend in with the crowd. No biceps bursting out of sleeves. No protein shaker in hand. He wore glasses, a tucked-in button-up shirt, and clean slacks. His hair was neatly combed. He looked professional. Academic, even. The kind of guy you'd expect to see at a university, lecture, or a board meeting, not front and center at a fitness expo. Still, he stood by Karoline, smiling gently, happy to see her so thrilled. As they approached the main stage area, Karoline spotted Arnold surrounded by a small crowd. She squeezed Daniel's hand. "There he is! Can you believe this?" They got closer, and the people around Arnold began to notice them, not because they were loud or flashy, but because they stood out. Daniel, especially. His quiet demeanor was almost out of place in this high-energy environment. That's when Arnold noticed them. He squinted for a second, tilted his head, and smirked. The kind of smirk that always came before one of his famous one-liners. Leaning over to one of his team members, but loud enough that a few bystanders heard, Arnold chuckled and said, "Did she bring her accountant to a fitness event?" Laughter rippled through the nearby crowd. A few people turned their heads and chuckled. One guy even nudged his friend and whispered, "That was cold, but kind of funny." Arnold, still grinning, looked straight at Daniel, expecting a smile back, maybe a laugh, or even a sheepish reaction. But Daniel didn't laugh. Karoline's smile froze. She tried to shake it off, but something in her expression shifted, a crack in the excitement. Her grip on Daniel's hand tightened. His face, meanwhile, turned slightly red, not from anger, not from shame, but from the awkwardness of the moment, the spotlight he didn't ask for. Still, Daniel didn't flinch. Arnold, noticing the lack of response, raised an eyebrow and added, "Hey, it's all in good fun. You look like you do taxes for guys like me." More chuckles. The joke was landing for some, but the mood began to shift. A few people stopped laughing. The moment that started as light-hearted suddenly felt a little too sharp, like the joke had gone just a beat too far. Karoline looked at her husband, searching his face. "You okay?" she whispered. Daniel gave her a soft nod. Then, slowly, he took a step forward. Not aggressively, but with quiet purpose. His eyes met Arnold's. Calm, steady, unbothered. In a firm, clear voice, loud enough for those nearby to hear, Daniel said, "I've actually admired you for years, Mr. Schwarzenegger. I may not lift weights, But I lift people. The laughter died. A hush fell over the circle of onlookers. Arnold blinked, caught off guard by the seriousness and confidence in Daniel's words. Daniel continued, voice even and strong. I'm a trauma surgeon. Last week I spent 14 hours in an operating room helping a young girl survive a car accident. I didn't need muscles for that. I needed hands that didn't shake and a mind that stayed sharp. Silence. You could feel the change in the air. What began as a joke was now something else entirely. Respect was building. The laughter was gone. And in its place, people began to see Daniel not as a punchline, but as a quiet giant in his own. Right. Arnold stared for a second, then did something no one expected. People around them were still giggling, clearly entertained by the jab Arnold had thrown just seconds ago. It was classic Schwarzenegger humor, quick, cheeky, and loud enough to get a crowd reaction. Most thought it was just part of the show, but not everyone was laughing anymore. Karoline stood beside her husband, her smile faltering. She let out a nervous chuckle, trying to hide the sting. This was supposed to be a dream moment, meeting her hero, the man she had idolized for years. But instead, it had taken an unexpected turn. And now all eyes were on them. Daniel, her husband, stood motionless. Not stiff with anger, not trembling with embarrassment, just still, centered. His expression was unreadable. His gaze, however, was unwavering. He looked Arnold straight in the eyes, not a challenge, not a stare down, but a steady, grounded look that didn't flinch. The kind of look that didn't belong to someone who needed to prove anything. Arnold caught that look and tilted his head slightly, as if intrigued. Then, with that familiar smirk that had become part of his brand, he added another jab. Come on, man, it's all in good fun. You don't look like you bench press. Anything. The crowd burst into laughter again. A few people whistled, but this time it didn't last as long. Some faces in the crowd began to shift, eyebrows raising, smiles fading. Something about the moment didn't feel as funny anymore. Maybe it was the confidence in Daniel's stillness, or the subtle discomfort in Karoline's eyes. Maybe it was that the joke had hit too close to home, and people were beginning to realize it wasn't just a show. Daniel took a slow breath and then took a step forward. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to outdo Arnold. He simply moved forward, closed the distance, and extended his hand. A hush began to fall over the surrounding crowd. I've actually admired you for years, Mr. Schwarzenegger, Daniel said, his voice calm and clear, with no hint of sarcasm. I may not lift weights, but I lift people. The sentence hung in the air. It was such a simple line, but it hit like a thunderclap. The laughter stopped. Even Arnold's grin wavered slightly, and his brow furrowed in curiosity. He opened his mouth to speak, but Daniel continued, this time not just speaking to Arnold, but to the whole room. I'm a trauma surgeon, he said. I've spent the last 15 years in operating rooms, saving lives. I've held hearts in my hands. I've seen life leave a body and brought it back. I've been up for 36 hours straight, not for glory, not for applause, but because someone's daughter or husband needed me to keep going. The crowd was silent now. Every ear was tuned in. Even the cameras, which had been filming Arnold, were now slowly turning toward Daniel. I don't train in gyms, Daniel said, nodding toward Arnold. But I train my mind. I train my hands. I train my heart to stay strong in the face of tragedy. When someone's bleeding out in front of me, I don't get to joke. I don't get to flex. I get one chance to make it right. His voice didn't waver once. And somehow the quietness of it all made it feel louder than any mic drop ever could. And I'm not here to impress anyone, he said, glancing at Karoline, who now looked at him with tears in her eyes. I'm here because my wife is a fan, and because she deserves this moment. The silence that followed was heavier than the laughter that had come before. Arnold stood there, expression neutral. No smirk, no comeback. Just listening. And thinking It was rare to see the legend caught off guard, but this moment was undeniably different. This wasn't a heckler. This wasn't a hater. This was a man with substance. A man who didn't need to be loud to be powerful. Someone in the back whispered, "Damn, that was deep." And it was. Not because Daniel had fired back, but because he hadn't. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't trade jokes. He stood in truth. Quiet, strong, unshakable. In that moment, everyone saw it. Daniel wasn't weak. He wasn't out of place. He wasn't the accountant at the fitness event. He was something else entirely. Daniel's voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It didn't try to outshine anyone. But it carried more weight than any speech Arnold had given on that stage all day. "I'm a trauma surgeon," Daniel said. Again, his tone steady and sincere. "Last week I did a 14-hour operation on a child who had been in a terrible car crash. He was losing blood fast. His heart stopped. Twice. You could hear a pin drop. No cameras. No applause. Just a race against time. And we saved him. Not because I have big arms, but because I have trained for moments like that my entire life. I didn't need muscles. I needed focus, skill, and heart." The air in the room changed. Slowly, the buzz of the expo began to fade into the background. Conversations stopped. Even the DJ lowered the music, sensing something powerful was happening in the crowd. Arnold, who had been known to command every room he entered, now found himself listening, really listening, to a man he had just mocked. Daniel continued, his voice unwavering. "I'm also a professor of medicine. I teach young medical students, some of whom are standing in this room right now, how to save lives. I teach them what strength really looks like. Not just in the hands, but in the mind, in compassion, in staying calm when everyone else is falling apart." People in the crowd started nodding. Someone even whispered, "Whoa." Daniel paused, looked at his wife, and then looked back at Arnold. "And most importantly," he said softly, "I support my wife. She's a champion in her own right. She's worked harder than anyone I know to be here today. I didn't come here to impress anyone. I came because I love her. I came to see her smile, that's all." He reached for Karoline's hand, gently. Karoline, who had been trying so hard to stay composed, now had tears in her eyes. Her chest rose and fell with emotion. She wasn't just proud. She was in awe of a man who didn't raise his voice to defend himself, because he didn't need to. All around them, the laughter that had once rippled through the room was replaced by complete silence. Not the awkward kind, but the respectful kind. The rare kind. The kind that comes when people realize they just witnessed something real. Even Arnold's expression changed. His trademark grin slowly disappeared. Not because he was embarrassed, but because he was humbled. The man who had once been on top of the bodybuilding world, who had led armies in movies and inspired millions, suddenly saw in front of him a different kind of strength, one that didn't need spotlights or stages. For a brief second, Arnold's large frame seemed smaller. His booming presence, usually the loudest in the room, grew quiet. His eyes scanned Daniel's face, searching, maybe, for something he hadn't expected to find, and he found it. A quiet force. Daniel didn't wear his accomplishments like medals. He didn't need to list them. He didn't boast or fight back. But in just a few calm sentences, he had shifted the entire energy of the room. He had earned something most people spend their lives chasing: respect, not demanded, not forced, not begged for. Earned. Karoline squeezed his hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been prouder of you." Daniel gave a small smile. "I just told the truth." Around them, phones were being lowered. Influencers weren't posing anymore. A few audience members wiped their eyes, touched by the unexpected depth of the moment. The crowd that had laughed before now stood still. For once, in a world obsessed with appearances, followers, and flexing, someone reminded them all that real strength doesn't always come in the form of muscles. Sometimes it wears glasses, sometimes it walks softly, and sometimes it stands in silence, letting its actions speak louder than any words ever could. Even Arnold seemed to recognize it. He stepped forward slowly, eyes focused, grin gone, ready to say something he didn't often say. But before he did, one thing was already clear. The man who had walked in as just the husband had now become the man everyone in the room respected most. Arnold Schwarzenegger was no stranger to being the loudest voice in a room. With decades of fame, trophies, and blockbuster lines under his belt, he was used to controlling the moment, keeping people laughing and commanding attention with ease. But now, he stood silent. The man he had just poked fun at, Daniel, the soft-spoken trauma surgeon, had addressed the crowd not with bravado, but with clarity, confidence, and humility. The laughter that had filled the room minutes ago had vanished. In its place, a heavy, contemplative stillness. Arnold looked at Daniel. He could have brushed it off, could have flexed again, cracked a follow-up joke, and moved on. After all, it was Arnold. He didn't have to apologize to anyone, especially not at a fitness expo, on his stage, surrounded by his fans. But he didn't do any of that. Instead, something rare happened. Arnold nodded slowly, visibly moved. The grin was gone. His usual playful spark had softened into something much more sincere. "You know what?" he said, his voice a little quieter now. "I was out of line." The words fell heavy. They weren't rehearsed. They weren't scripted for a camera. They came from somewhere real. Arnold glanced at the crowd, then back at Daniel. "I've spent my whole life building muscles, perfecting my body, chasing strength people could see." He paused, then added, "But you build something far more important." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. You could feel everyone leaning in, watching the legend humble himself before a man most had dismissed on sight. Then came the moment no one expected. Arnold stepped off the stage. In his usual boots and muscle-hugging shirt, he moved through the small space between the crowd and Daniel, every step deliberate. He walked right up to the man he had mocked only minutes earlier and extended his hand. It wasn't casual, it wasn't forced, it was a handshake full of respect. The kind of handshake men give when words fall short. Firm, real, honest. Daniel, ever composed, accepted it with the same quiet grace he'd shown all along. "I tease a lot of people," Arnold said, locking eyes with Daniel. "Sometimes for fun, sometimes because that's just been my way for years. But today, you reminded me of something important." He turned slightly to face the audience, lifting his voice just enough. "Strength doesn't always look like this," he said, raising one massive bicep with a familiar Arnold flex. The crowd chuckled lightly, not in mockery, but relief, like exhaling after holding their breath. "Sometimes it looks like that," he continued, pointing to Daniel's chest, to the heart, to courage, to self-control. That's what real power is. The room exploded, not in laughter, but in applause. It wasn't polite clapping. It was the kind that rolled like a wave, thunderous, emotional, electric. People stood. Some whistled. Others clapped with tears in their eyes. A few captured it all on their phones, realizing they'd just witnessed something rare. A public figure choosing humility over ego. Karoline, holding Daniel's hand, looked up at him, her eyes gleaming with pride and emotion. This wasn't the story she had imagined when they walked in, but it was one she would remember for the rest of her life. Arnold smiled again, this time not as a performer, not as the larger-than-life action star, but as a man who had just been reminded of something vital. He leaned in slightly and said to Daniel, quietly but clearly, "Thank you, Doctor. Not just for what you do, but for who you are." Daniel nodded, offering a small smile. "And thank you for listening." Arnold stepped back and turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a grin returning to his face, "that is a real hero." Another wave of applause followed, this time louder, deeper, earned. It was more than just a touching moment. It was a cultural reset in that room, a reminder to everyone watching that muscles, fame, and fortune can impress people, but character moves them. And as the cameras continued to roll and the applause rang out, one thing became absolutely clear. Arnold had come to the stage as the star, but Daniel, he walked away as the legend. That evening, back in their hotel room, Karoline sat at the edge of the bed, still trying to process what had happened. Her hands trembled slightly as she uploaded the video she had recorded at the expo, a raw, unedited clip of Daniel facing down one of the most iconic men in the world, not with defiance but with quiet dignity. She didn't add a fancy caption, just a simple one. "Strength comes in many forms. Today, I saw the strongest man I know." Remind the world of that. By the time they turned off the lights and drifted to sleep, the video had already started making waves online. A few hundred shares, some reposts, a couple of viral comments. But by morning, everything had changed. The video had exploded. Millions of views, comments from around the world, people from every walk of life, doctors, nurses, teachers, fitness enthusiasts, soldiers, parents, all chimed in with the same message. This is the kind of man we should look up to. Respect earned in absolute silence. Incredible, I cried. Real strength doesn't need to be loud. The story touched a nerve because it flipped the usual script. This wasn't about someone yelling to be heard or fighting back with fists or fury. This was about composure, conviction, character. The mocked had become the admired. Within hours, media outlets picked it up. Headlines read, "Schwarzenegger's joke backfires, but ends in powerful moment of respect." Dr. Silence's A. Room and wins hearts everywhere. Not all heroes wear capes or muscle tees. Interview requests flooded in. Karoline and Daniel were asked to appear on talk shows, podcasts, and panels. But they politely declined most of them. Not because they were ungrateful, but because they hadn't done it for attention. They hadn't gone to the expo to make a statement. They had simply been living their truth, and the world happened to notice. In one rare interview, Arnold addressed the incident directly. Sitting in front of a camera, more serious than usual, he said, "That moment changed me. I've met champions in the gym, on the stage, in movies, but Daniel, he's a champion in life." He spoke about how easy it was to rely on humor, to poke fun without knowing someone's story. "Sometimes," he admitted, "I forget that strength doesn't always look like a flexed bicep. Sometimes it wears glasses and a calm voice." The video continued to circulate, becoming more than just viral content. It became a lesson. Teachers used it in classrooms to discuss empathy and composure. Motivational speakers quoted Daniel's words. Online forums debated what it really means to be strong, and many men shared how they, too, had often felt overlooked or underestimated based on appearances. And yet, through it all, Karoline and Daniel stayed the same. They returned to their routine. Early morning coffee, hospital shifts, Karoline's fitness training, evening walks in the neighborhood. They didn't try to build a brand or launch a platform. They didn't start selling merch or giving speeches because they didn't need to. Their story had already spoken louder than any campaign ever could. For millions, that clip wasn't just a feel-good moment. It was a mirror. A reminder that, in a world obsessed with showing off strength, the quiet kind often matters most. The strength to stay calm under pressure, to lead without shouting, to lift others up without needing a spotlight. And perhaps most beautifully of all, Daniel never once tried to win the moment. He didn't clap back or insult. He didn't try to out-alpha a legend. He simply told the truth, and in doing so, he won something bigger than applause: the world's respect. As for Karoline, she often said the real victory wasn't in going viral. It was in watching her husband, someone who never sought attention, finally be seen for the incredible man he was. And for those who watched that video, maybe at their desk, maybe late at night when they needed a little hope, one thing stayed with them long after the clip ended. Real strength doesn't always come with muscles or loud voices. Sometimes, it walks in quietly and changes everything.